Hello everyone. This semester we'll be learning a lot about literary theories. There are many schools of criticism that each approaches literary texts from different perspectives. There are no laws that govern how people should read literature. But there are some ideas that express or that summarize or pinpoint or show what certain texts mean to certain individuals at certain settings and in certain periods of time. So this semester we will look at literary texts from other people's perspectives first, in a way to develop our own reasoned ways of seeing. I hope you will enjoy the content of this semester. We will be talking a lot about literary texts. But rather than specifically focusing on texts, we will focus on how certain professors or certain thinkers, philosophers, approached texts. We will see that each professional, each theoretician first lays out how he or she perceives and understands the construction of a literary text. And then we will see that, again, each theoretician constructs a way of seeing and then writing about literature or a literary text. So in that sense, we will somehow see ourselves in the shoes of others, copying or relating to or modeling professors, professionals, or theoreticians who studied literature before us. We will start with moral criticism, which flourished almost 2,500 years ago. We will start with Plato and continue with Aristotle and Horace. And then we will move on to the Renaissance and afterwards. I hope you will enjoy reading about literary theories, because you will come to see that after dealing with such issues, your interpretations will differ largely from your previous ones. Interestingly, thinking and writing about literary theories does not only improve your reading skills or how you approach and analyze texts, but how you perceive and understand films, computer games, and people around you. So I think it will be a great opportunity for you to renew your ways of seeing. Enjoy. People have been telling stories since the earliest days of history. Oftentimes, as we imagine today, telling stories around bonfires at night or in cold winter nights during which they cannot really go out. They shared responses to stories as well. So they talked about stories. They asked questions that come out of these stories. By reading and discussing literature, we expand our imagination, as you know, our sense of what is possible. and our ability to empathize with others. Reading and writing literature can also improve our writing skills. It may sharpen our critical skills, enabling us to assess, texts, films, people around us. So studying literature, very similar to listening to stories thousands of years ago in the caves, around the bonfire, and so on, brings new questions to our minds. So in that sense, our relationship with literature is not that different when compared to our grandfathers who told stories around bonfires. Literary texts include works of fiction and poetry. In school, your professors, your teachers, ask you questions about literary texts, or they ask you to critique those texts. That is to say, bring new insight into or seeing what is not really said in the text. So reading between the lines. Literary criticism, however, refers to a genre of writing whereby an author critiques a literary text, either a work of fiction, a play, or a poem. Alternatively, some works of literary criticism address how a particular theory of interpretation informs a reading of a work or refutes some other critics' reading of a work. That is to say, dealing with literary theories or literary criticism is a playground on its own. So in order to fully develop ourselves as literary critics, we have to, read extensively what others said about other literary texts by and large and throughout history. The lion's share of literary criticism takes place more formally in university classrooms, professional journals, academic magazines, and websites, and symposia and conferences. Students interpret literary works for English instructors on demand. So oftentimes we professors ask our students to write about, to answer specific questions about a literary text. Students interpret literary works for English instructors in a more, structured way that is sometimes boring for them. In your interpretations as students, you may argue for a particular interpretation, or you may argue against what others said about those literary texts. So your professor might give you a quote about that literary text and ask you to respond to it by creating counter arguments. You may also read a text without a particular theory in mind, because you may think that a theory is, so to speak, limiting your way of seeing. You might be right, because let's consider the case of feminist criticism. So when you read a novel, if you read the text from a feminist perspective, most probably you see nothing but women's issues or Marxist criticism. In that novel, for instance, there is nothing but class struggle or problems related with capitalism and economy. Or if you take a formalist point of view, you will see nothing but word arts and themes and symbols. True, a literary text is more than what a theory holds. However, literary theories, one by one, gives us skills to interpret and see in a very profound way. Oftentimes, anyone who reads a novel may come up with similar interpretations. But studying literary theories, you will come up with very condensed and very profound and very skillful interpretations of a literary text. For example, Kate Chopin's The Story of an Hour is a very short story, and oftentimes it is studied from a feminist theoretical perspective. But today, if you Google the title of the short story, you may come up with hundreds of different perspectives. Some of them are rooted in certain theories, but some of them are just students' reflections. None is, by virtue, in theory, no interpretation is more impressive or more acceptable than the other. However, studying literary criticism entails that you create an argument, or you look for an argument in a literary text in a scientifically acceptable, systematic way. That's why we are dealing with theory, because a theory, as you know, is systematic, thus scientific. So studying theories in this course will a little bit let you experience the scientific way of seeing literary texts rather than a personal one, except for reader response criticism, about which we will talk later. Over the years, literary critics have argued about the best ways to interpret literature. Accordingly, many different schools or theories of criticism have emerged. As you can imagine, given that they were developed by sophisticated specialists or thinkers, philosophers, professors, or etc., some of these theoretical approaches are quite sophisticated and abstract. To be honest, I find Jacques Lacan very, very difficult to understand. So in my courses, I do not really teach Lacan, because I myself cannot really understand how his ideas can be, used in literature. It is not to say that I belittle, I detest, or I dislike Lacan. No, I respect him. Grateful, I'm grateful to him for what he did. And I know there is, he is the guy. He's a big guy. But I, with my small brain and, elderly habits of studying, cannot really understand him. I think it is okay. We cannot understand and know and learn everything perfectly. There is also another issue. We as human beings are inclined to some theories more than the others. Some students, as soon as I start my courses, I noticed that some students are really into formalism, whereas some others do not really like it. And you will see that these students do not like linguistics or the formal study of grammar. While some of my students are very much interested in feminism or Marxism, some others are interested in eco-criticism. Literary criticism, in that sense, is a reasoned consideration of literary works and issues. It is reasoned because there is a scientific approach and a systematic approach to it. It applies as a term to any argumentation about literature, whether or not specific works are analyzed orally or in a written format. The first of these literary critics we will talk about is Plato. Plato cautions against the risky consequences of poetic inspiration in general. In his Republic, he shows the earliest examples of literary criticism. And in the upcoming weeks, you will see that Plato, although he is cited and he is mentioned, he is taught in literary criticism, he did not really like poets. So literary criticism in that sense is like an amusement park. You know, there are different rides for you to enjoy. You may like Plato, and you may, really find his ideas inspiring and interesting, but you may not really enjoy Lacan or Freud or anyone else. However, you will see that reading about these individuals, these scholars, will enrich your understanding and appreciation of literary texts in the long run. The practice of literary theory and criticism became a profession in the 20th century, but its historical roots has as far back as ancient Greece. For instance, Aristotle's Poetics and Plato's Republic, as I have mentioned in the previous slide. Ancient India, for instance, Bharata Muni's Natya Shastra, and ancient Rome, Longinus' work on the sublime. Now, more interestingly, Western literary criticism owes a lot to Islamic critics during the medieval Islam. For instance, in medieval Iraq, Al-Jahiz wrote Bayan wal Tabyin, and more importantly, his work Animals al-Haywan affected literary criticism in the West more than maybe any other work did. Also, Ibn al-Mutaz's work Kitab al-Badi can be cited as an important resource that affected Western literary canon. So the aesthetic theories of philosophers from ancient philosophy through the 18th and 19th centuries, from India, Iraq, Andalusia, and Europe, of course, are important influences on current literary study. The theory and criticism of literature are, of course, closely tied to the history of literature. In that sense, a thorough understanding of literary criticism entails a study of history from a very sharp and keen perspective. Of course, in this year, we cannot really work as historians or literary critics or authors or readers and historians, but we will try to open our eyes and ears to learn more and more about how ideas flourished and evolved in history, regardless of geographies, religions, languages, cultures, and other barriers. So, in this session, we briefly talked about what literary criticism is about. Along with your readings and further extension activities, make sure that you try to understand and reflect on how you approach literary texts, how you interpret texts as a person. Um, at the same time, make sure that what we will be studying throughout the semester will develop your understanding and skills of reading. So in that sense, you will see a great difference between your output, written output on literary text now, and in the end of this course. So make sure you keep copies of your reflections, because you will see how much you improved, how differently you started to see things. And it will be a great experience for you, as much as it is for me. Next week, we'll be talking about um, Plato, Aristotle, Horace, and so on. So have a great start. Enjoy your readings, and I hope you will remain safe and sound throughout your life.